Exclusive videos, story continuations, and bonus content are already available on Patreon before YouTube, so check the link in the description for early access to all new recaps and continuations.
Arn opened his and saw the sky. Not the ceiling, not the lamp. The sky. Gray and low. It smelled smoke and wet leather. He lay on the ground and felt the cold on my back. Someone was him by shoulder. His mother was sharp. She said that advice had met. What he do get and go. Arn got up and realized that his legs wouldn't obey me. No from the cold. It's that he already knew how at this day. 26 days ago he suggested to smear the walls of the huts with clay. Gorn struck his fist on the ground and said that the walls made hides held the tribe 100 winters and will hold another 100. 19 days ago Arn showed how to make a rope from plant fibers. Strong, smooth, just that doesn't tear under the weight of carcass. 3 hunters used it in secret. The shaman boar saw and declared that the rope was within spirit, that ordinary grass does be that strong. 12 days ago Arn brought water. He simply placed a stone bowl on the bow and waited until the water began to bubble. Then gave his sister Irma a drink. Irma had had a stomachache for 3 days, and after drinking the boiled water, she felt better by morning. Horn saw this. Horn said nothing. And 6 days ago, Arn made a mistake. He spoke up in front of the whole tribe. He said that if they dug a ditch from the stream to the clearing, the water would come on its own, and they wouldn't have to carry it in water skins. 43 people were looking at him. He saw not curiosity in their eyes, fear. Horn stood up, broad, heavy, with hands that had broken deer bones with bare fingers. The father looked at his son, and in his eyes was something worse than anger, disbelief. Horn didn't say a word then, but Arn saw how that evening his father sat for a long time with Boar by the fire. Now the council. Arn walked through the camp and counted the faces. 43 people, 22 adults. The rest were children and the elderly. The Stone Wolves tribe, his family, his people. The only people he knew in this world. In his past life, he knew different numbers. 8 billion. Cities, roads, airplanes, antibiotics. He died at 24, choked on a nut, a walnut, during the defense of his dissertation on the early civilizations of Mesopotamia. The last thing he saw was his advisor's face. Not frightened, disappointed, as if even Arna's death wasn't academic enough. And then darkness, and then a scream, his own, the cry of a baby in a cave. 19 years ago. He remembered everything, every lecture, every book, every diagram from the history of technology textbook. He knew that pottery would appear thousands of years later, that copper would be smelted even later, that the wheel would change everything. He knew how to make soap, how to fire a brick, how to assemble the simplest bow that shoots twice as far as those sticks with stones the stone wolves used to hunt with. And all this knowledge was worth nothing, because he was alone. One man doesn't dig canals. One man doesn't build a kiln. One man can't even fire a pot, because that requires keeping the fire going for 2 days straight. Knowledge without hands is just noise in your head. The council gathered around a large fire. Horn sat on a rock. Boar stood nearby, old, skinny, wearing a necklace of bird skulls. Boar always smelled of something sour. In a past life, Arn would have given a lecture on the role of shamanism in pre-state societies. In this life, he simply tried not to stand too close to Boar. Boar spoke first. He spoke at length. He said that the spirits of the ancestors were displeased, that ever since Arn had begun to touch the water and the grass and the earth, the camp had become restless, that 3 children had been coughing for 2 nights in a row, that the wolves were coming closer than usual, that the moon was red, and that was a sign. Arn wanted to say that the children were coughing because they were sleeping on damp skins, that the wolves were coming closer because the tribe was leaving scraps too close to the camp, that the moon was red because of the smoke from a forest fire to the south. But he remained silent, because he knew that the truth didn't matter when people had already decided to be afraid. Horn raised his hand. Everyone fell silent. The father looked at his son. Arn looked at his father. 19 years old. Gorn had taught him to throw a spear. Gorn had carried him on his shoulders across an icy stream. Gorn had once fought a lynx with his bare hands because the lynx had approached the spot where little Arn was sleeping. The 3 scars on his father's left forearm were from that night. Gorn spoke. He said that Arn was no longer part of the tribe, that the spirits demanded his departure, that he must leave before the sun rose above the trees. His father's voice did not tremble. His hands did. Arn looked at his mother. Tara stood 3 paces behind Gorn, the tribe's best hunter, the woman who once killed a boar with a single spear thrust to the eye. Tara was staring at the ground. She was silent. Arn felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger, something heavier. He turned to Irma. His sister was standing by the farthest hut. Little one. 7 years old, a dirty face, eyes wide open. She didn't understand what was happening, or perhaps she understood all too well. Arn wanted to go to her, wanted to say he'd be back. But Bor had already stepped forward and pointed his stick toward the sunrise. The gesture was clear. Arn nodded. He returned to his place. He gathered a water skin, a flint knife, a piece of dried meat, a hide, everything he had. Everything a man with the memory of an entire civilization possessed. He walked through the camp, and no one met his gaze. 38 people looked away. 4 were asleep and didn't know. Irma watched. Arn stepped beyond the line of campfires. The morning air was cold and damp. The forest stood like a wall. He knew there was a river to the east. He remembered that 2 days' journey to the south lay a rocky outcrop. There might be clay there. There might be limestone. There might be a beginning. In a past life, he had read that the first settlements arose near water, that pottery requires a certain type of clay, that firing begins at a temperature of about 600 degrees, that thousands of years of trial and error preceded the first city. He didn't have thousands of years. He walked alone through the wet forest and thought that the earliest civilization in history did not begin with a genius. It began with someone deciding to stay in one place. He would find that place, and then he would find people. Because one person is not a civilization. One person is just a madman who talks to clay. He was walking east, toward the river. The river was found around noon the day. Wide, fast in the middle, and calm at shore. Arn stood on clay cliff and looked down. The water was murky from the rain, the sloping with one side and abrupt on the other. South of the river made a turn, and behind there, a wall. Not very high. 5'5". In the wall, a cave. Arn went down the slope and approached closer. The cave stretched deeper, 10 steps, dry. The ceiling sufficient high enough stand in full height. At entrance traces an old fire pit. Someone lived here. A long time ago, maybe a year ago, maybe 10. Arn shed his and sat on a stone. My feet burned from walking. He didn't eat since morning. Dried meat ran out yesterday, last night. He was in thinking. Last past life, the plan was have strategic. Identify resources, assess the territory, build a basic shelter, ensure water and food, find people. In this life, the plan looked simpler. Not die. He began with water. He went to the river and filled a full water skin. Then I found a flat stone. I gathered dry twigs. I took out flint and began strike a spark. In the Nikla was by sticks. For a long time and painfully. Arn knew a way better. Flint over flint. A spark on dry moss. Breath. Steady, not strong. Fire flared up at fourth attempt. He placed the stone over the flame and brought the water. Such simple thing. Boiling. For this simple thing he was from home. The first night in cave he slept poorly. Every sound from the forest set him to his rustling, the crackling of twigs, one time a distant howl. He knew that in these forests there were wolves and bears and big cats about which in his past life were written in textbooks paleontology. It lay and listened the darkness, and thought that everything his knowledge about tactics and military history will help if at night in cave abrade a predator. In the morning, he surveyed the territory. On the shore he found clay, gray-brown, rich. He took a lump and kneaded between his fingers. Good, quite supple. In past life he saw Neolithic, in the museum, rough, thick-walled, covered with patterns from ropes. Then he thought that the first potters were primitive. Now standing on knee in river mud, he was that. The first potters were geniuses. Because realizing that mud can be turned into stone with the help of fire isn't primitive, it's a revolution. He gathered some clay, 2 large lumps, carried them to the cave and began shaping them. The first pot came out crooked. The sides were uneven. The bottom was thick on one side and thin on the other. He remembered the theory, the coil method. Roll the clay into a long sausage, lay it in rings, smooth the seams with wet fingers. Theory and practice turned out to be worlds apart. The second pot was slightly better. The third was almost even. He set all 3 out in the sun to dry. Firing would take place in 2 days once the clay had dried. Without firing, it was just mud. After firing, it was pottery. The first step in the technological chain that, in his past life, had led humanity from caves to skyscrapers. On the 4th day of solitude, he heard a noise. Heavy, uneven, as if someone big were pushing through the bushes. Arn grabbed his flint knife and pressed himself against the cave wall. The noise was getting closer. A crackling sound, rattling breath, and a voice. Human. The voice cursed with every step. A man stumbled out of the bushes, big, broad-shouldered. His left leg dragged along the ground. His right hand pressed a bundle of leaves, dark with blood, to his side. The man took 3 steps and fell, face down in the clay. Arn waited 10 heartbeats. The man didn't move. Arn approached, turned him over. Alive, breathing. A laceration on his left side, long, from his ribs to his thigh. Not deep, but bleeding profusely. A claw wound. A bear. Or a big cat. Arn looked at the wound and saw dirt on the edges. In his past life, he knew the word. Sepsis. Blood poisoning. Without antibiotics, it's death within a week. Even with antibiotics, there's no guarantee. There are no antibiotics. There was boiled water. There was knowledge of which plants contained natural antiseptics. Arn boiled the water and washed the wound. The man groaned, but did not regain consciousness. Arn found plantain by the river. He found moss that in his past life was called sphagnum. Sphagnum absorbs liquid and has mild antibacterial properties. He knew this from his ethnobotany course, a course he took as an elective in his 3rd year of graduate school, an elective that seemed useless, an elective that could now save a life. He applied the moss to the wound, secured it with strips of hide, changed the bandage every few hours, rinsed the wound with boiled water. The man regained consciousness by evening. His eyes were cloudy, his lips were chapped. He looked at Arn and asked who he was. Arn said his name was Arn, and that he was from the Stone Wolves tribe. The man smiled. He said his name was Craig, and that he, too, had been from a tribe, just not the Stone Wolves. The river foxes. Had been. Craig spoke slowly, with pauses. The river foxes tribe lived 2 days' journey to the north, 30 people. In winter a disease came, a cough, fever. The children died first. By spring 12 remained. Then people with red marks on their faces came, many of them. They didn't speak. They just came and took the food and the skins and the women. Craig fought. Craig was struck in the knee with a stone axe. His leg healed crooked. He left, alone. He was heading south. A bear found him 2 days ago. Craig stared at the cave ceiling and said he didn't care anymore. Arn said nothing. He was changing his bandage and thinking about the people with the red marks, the red fangs. He'd heard about them in the tribe. A large tribe, aggressive, 200 or more people. They were moving from east to west and taking everything in their path. It would take them maybe 6 months to reach the stone wolves, maybe less. Arn looked at Craig. A broken leg, a torn side, no tribe, no hope, but broad shoulders, and hands that clearly knew what work was. Arn said he had an idea. Craig said that people with ideas usually have short lives. Arn replied that people without ideas have even shorter lives. Craig was silent for a long time. Then he asked if there was any food. Arn handed him a piece of grilled fish. He'd caught the fish that morning with his bare hands in the shallows. A shameful way for a hunter. An effective way for a hungry man. Craig ate and looked at the 3 crooked pots drying at the cave entrance. He asked why there was mud on the stones. Arn said that in 2 days the mud would turn to stone. Craig looked at him as if he were crazy. It was a look Arn knew all too well. A week later, Craig began to walk. His leg hurt but held up. The wound on his side was healing. The moss and boiled water were doing their job. Craig watched as Arn fired the pots. The small fire didn't reach the right temperature. The first pot cracked. The second crumbled. The third one held up. Crooked, rough, but solid. Craig tapped it with his finger and said nothing. But his eyes had changed. No longer empty. Arn looked at his first pot. You could store water in this pot, carry grain, cook food. The entire history of human civilization began with pots like these, crooked and ugly, but changing everything. 1 pot out of 3, a 33% success rate. In a past life, such a percentage would have seemed like a failure. In this life, it was a triumph. He turned to Craig and said that tomorrow he would show him how to make a rope. Craig shrugged and replied that it certainly couldn't get any worse. Craig turned out that person who understands with his hands. Arn drew with a stick on the ground and explained. Craig remained silent, then took the material and got to work. Without questions. No arguments. Just did it. The rope made plant fibers Craig mastered in a day. On second day he wove faster than Arn. On third day he came up with how twist 3 strands into one, and a rope became 3 times stronger. Arn knew the theory. Craig knew how fingers. Together they were almost useful. The first week they built a shelter. The cave was good for spending the night, but for work you need space. Arn chopped young trees with an axe. Craig dug them into the ground. They tied the frame with ropes and covered with plant and grass. It turned out something in between a trig and a shed. Crooked, but the rain didn't stop. Arn stood in front of this misery and thought of Gothic cathedrals and concrete skyscrapers and glass towers that he saw in his life. Then looked at hut-made sticks and grass. Between these sticks and those towers lay 10 years, and he was about to walk this path faster. Ceramics was from 10 pots, survived 2 or 3. The problem was the temperature. A bonfire provided strength 400 degrees. For a good firing, 600. For excellent, 800. Arn knew that needed furnace. Enclosed space for concentrating heat. In past life he saw reconstructions of ovens. A pit in ground. The walls are coated with clay. Above the vault with a hole for a tie rod. Just in theories. In reality he was a 3 days. He smeared the walls with 2 days. I let for 3. First oven collapsed during the first firing. The did hold up. The clay was too moist. Craig stood beside and watched at pile of debris. He said that Arn is person. Arn asked why. Craig replied that normal people give up after the first failure. Arn dug a second pit. The second kiln was built. The arch held. The temperature inside rose high enough that the pots didn't crack. Of the 10 pots, 7 survived. Then 8. The process was underway. On the 12th day, they were found. 2 people, a man and a woman, thin, dirty, with eyes in which there was nothing left but hunger. The man's name was Thor. The woman's was Lena. They were from a small group that had split off from some tribe in the north. The group didn't survive the winter. Just the 2 of them remained. They were heading south because they'd heard it was warmer there and there was more game. They saw smoke rising from the stove and followed it. Thor looked at the hut and the pots and the ropes and couldn't understand what was happening. Lena looked at the boiling water in the pot and her hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from the smell of cooked fish. Arn gave them something to eat. Then he said they could stay if they worked. Thor asked what it meant to work. Arn explained. There are tasks. Everyone does their own. Some carry clay, some chop wood, some weave ropes, some people cook food. Not everyone for themselves, everyone together. Thor didn't understand. In his world, everyone hunted for themselves and their families. The idea that a stranger would work for him and he for a stranger was incomprehensible. Lena understood faster. She asked if she could make pots. Her hands turned out to be more precise than Arn's. 3 days later, her pots were smoother than his first ones. A week later, she began making bowls and small storage vessels. Arn watched this and thought about the division of labor. Adam Smith. Economics. Specialization. Thousands of pages of theory that boiled down to a simple idea. When everyone does what they do best, the result is greater than the sum of their individual efforts. By the end of the 3rd week, there were 6 of them. A couple with a child had arrived. The man was limping. The woman was carrying a boy of about 3. They said they had been expelled from their tribe because the man couldn't hunt with his injured leg. Useless. Tribes didn't feed the useless. Arn looked at the man. His name was Dan. His leg was broken and had healed at an angle. He couldn't run, but his hands were strong. Arn gave him a stone axe and showed him how to hew logs. Dan worked in silence, quickly. By evening, he had hewn more logs than Craig had in 2 days. Useless. Arn smirked. In a world where only hunting was valued, a man who couldn't run was useless. In the world Arn was building, a man who couldn't run but worked with his hands was indispensable. By the end of the 1st month, there were 8 of them. 8 people, 4 huts, 12 pots, 1 kiln, 100 meters of rope, fishing traps in the river that yielded fish every day. Arn stood on the cliff and looked at what was taking shape. It wasn't a settlement. It was a camp. But a camp with order, with pots for storing water, with ropes on which fish were drying, with a kiln that smoked every other day. He turned to Craig and said it was time to work on irrigation. Craig asked what irrigation was. Arn explained. A ditch. From the river to a flat patch of land. The water flows on its own. Wild barley can be planted on this land. Wild barley grew along the river banks. Arn recognized it by its ears. In his past life, he had seen photographs of wild barley from the Fertile Crescent. In this life, he stood among the thickets and gathered the ears by hand. The grains were small, hard, but this was the beginning. Agriculture. A revolution that, in real history, took thousands of years of trial and error. He didn't have thousands of years. He had a handful of grains and a ditch that needed to be dug. They dug for 3 days, with stone shovels, with their hands. 200 paces from the river to the clearing, a shallow ditch, an elbow's depth. The water started flowing on the 2nd day, a thin trickle, but it flowed. Arn stood over the ditch and watched the murky water creep across the ground. In his past life, he had read that irrigation appeared in Mesopotamia around the 8th millennium BCE, that it allowed 10 times more people to be fed than hunting and gathering, that without it, there would be no cities, no temples, no writing, nothing he knew or remembered. And here it was, a little ditch in the ground, the beginning of everything. Lena came over and asked why the water was flowing across the ground. Arn said that in 3 moons, barley would grow here. Lena asked what barley was. Arn showed her the ears of grain. Lena said it was grass and asked why they would plant grass when they could gather berries. Arn replied that the grass would feed 20 people, while the berries would feed only 2. Lena looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. That evening, Craig sat down next to Arn by the fire. He was silent for a while. Then he asked how Arn knew all this. Pots, ropes, water on the ground. Arn stared at the fire. He couldn't tell the truth. Not because he was afraid, because the truth was meaningless. I remember another life. I remember the world 10,000 years from now. I died choking on a nut. Craig would have decided he was possessed by an evil spirit. Arn said he just thought a lot. Craig snorted and replied that people who think a lot usually hunt poorly. Arn didn't argue. It was true. He was a lousy hunter. But he knew how to make hunting unnecessary. On 2nd month came Mira. She wasn't an outcast. She was a refugee. She left on her own. Mira was a healer from the Greystones which lived in the way to west. 30 years. Sinewy, with hands darkened from plant sap, with eyes that looked at them as if it's constantly counting everything around her. She came because she was about strange people by the river, people who are stone from mud, people who make water flow across the earth. The world was made by those rare people who wasn't fear the incomprehensible. The incomprehensible it upset. Not because that it, but because that it hasn't figured out how it works. She stood by the stove and touched the walls. She took a pot and tapped on it with one of her fingers. She approached to the gutter and looked as the water, then turned to Arno and said that he needed help. Arn asked what? Mira replied that with that in not die in winter. She was right. From 8 people, 5 were coughing. Of Danahead, his leg. His son had a rash from some plant. Arn was for 4 hours a day, and his hands were from fatigue. Mira looked at everyone. She knew the plants. Not as knew Arn, according textbooks. She knew them hands and nose and tongues. 20 years she collected and memorized. What root relieves fever? Which leaf stops bleeding? Which bark helps with pain? Arn told her about boiling water. Mira listened. Then she asked why. Arn said that in water, live creatures so small that they cause diseases. Boiling kills them. Mira looked at him for a long time. She didn't believe it. But she had that those who drank boiled water got sick less often. Mira was a practitioner. She didn't need believe. She should see the result. She stayed. And first thing she did was send Arna to sleep. She said that the chief who falls from exhaustion is not a leader, but a burden. Arn wanted to object. Mira looked at him in such a way that he lay down silently and slept for 12 hours. When he woke up, Mira had already brewed a herbal decoction in a new pot that smelled like a wet dog. She made everyone who was coughing drink it. By the next morning, the cough had gone away for 3 of them. Mira and Arn began working together. He provided the theory. She tested it in practice. He said that plantain had healing properties. She replied that she knew that and showed him 4 more plants that healed better. He described the principle of soap. Fat and ash. Alkali breaks down dirt. Mira boiled the first batch of soap for 3 days. Gray, smelly, slippery. But it worked. Her hands were cleaner after using it than after any wash with water. Arn showed the soap to the others. Thor sniffed it and tried to take a bite. Lena washed the fish with it. Craig looked at his hands after washing and said they were as soft as a baby's and asked if it was witchcraft. Arn explained that it was chemistry. Craig asked what chemistry was. Arn realized that some things were easier to show than to explain. By the middle of the second month, Arn began to think about a wall. Not a wall inside the cave, a wall around the settlement. 8 people on the open riverbank. No protection, no fence. Any predator could come at night. Any hostile group could come during the day. Craig agreed. He told how the Red Fangs had attacked his tribe. Without warning, they just came out of the forest, 50 men, with spears and axes and red clay marks on their cheekbones. Craig fell silent after that and didn't speak until evening. A wall. Arn sketched a plan on the ground. A palisade, logs dug into the ground and bound with ropes. Not a fortress, but enough to slow down a man or a beast. They chopped down trees for 12 days. 8 men, stone axes. Each tree took an hour of work. Each log had to be hewn, sharpened, and dug in. By the end of the 12 days, the wall surrounded an area 100 paces long and 60 wide. Not very high, chest high for an adult, but with a single entrance that could be blocked with logs. Arn stood by the wall and thought that in a past life he had read about Jericho, the first city with a stone wall, the 8th millennium BC. Jericho's wall was made of stone and stood 4 meters high. His wall was made of sticks and stood 1 meter 20 high. But the principle was the same, a boundary. This is our place. Here we decide what happens. That evening, 3 people came to the wall, 2 men and an old man. The old man was blind. They led him by the hands. The men were young and healthy and angry. They said they were coming from the north and looking for a place to wait out the winter. Arn looked at the old man. His name was Vuk. His eyes were white as milk, but his mind was clear. Vuk turned his face toward Arn and said he could smell smoke and clay and soap and something else he didn't recognize. Arn said it was the smell of boiled barley. Vuk asked what boiled barley was. Arn let him try some. Vuk chewed slowly. Then he said it wasn't tasty, but it was filling. Arn replied that this was progress. Vuk laughed. It was the first laugh Arn had heard in this world from anyone other than Irma. The 2 men turned out to be lazy. They wanted to eat and sleep and not work. After 3 days, Arn set a condition. Whoever doesn't work doesn't eat. It wasn't cruelty, it was arithmetic. 8 people produced food for 10, not for 12. One of the men left. The second stayed. His name was Roll. He grumbled every morning and every evening, but he worked. Poorly, but he worked. Vuk stayed too. The blind old man seemed useless. Arn didn't think so. Vuk had lived 60 winters. He had walked from the mountains in the east to the great water in the west. He knew where every tribe lived. He knew where the flint deposits were, and the red clay outcrops, and the places where the earth smelled of sulfur. He knew the trails and the passes and the fords. Vuk was a map. A living map of a world where maps did not exist. Arn sat with Vuk every evening. Vuk told stories. Arn listened and drew with a stick on the ground. In the north, mountains. 2 passes. Beyond the mountains, a plain. There lived tribes that hunt large beasts with long horns. To the west, 3 days' journey away, a great body of water. Not a river, more than that. Water that never ends. A lake, or a sea. Vuk didn't know the difference. To the south, forests. Dense, few people there. There is a beast with long fangs that kills with a single blow. To the east, where the red fangs came from, the land is flat and dry. Vuk said the red fangs had been coming from there for a long time. Not a year, not 2. They walked and walked westward and never stopped. Arn asked what they were running from. Vuk was silent. Then he said he didn't know. But those who had seen what the red fangs were running from could no longer tell. Arn sat by the fire after talking with Vuk and thought. The red fangs were running from something. They weren't just an aggressive tribe. They were refugees themselves. Refugees with an army of 200 men. That changed everything. It meant they wouldn't stop. They wouldn't leave. They were heading west and would keep going until they found a place safe enough. Or until they'd destroyed everyone in their path. Arn looked at his wall of sticks, 6 feet tall, against 200 men. He needed more. More people, more walls, more technology. He needed copper. Copper. In past life knew that Copper Age began around in 5th millennium BC, our era. People discovered green stones. They round them into the fire. From the stones, something shiny and heavy. A coincidence that changed the world. Arn could wait chance. He needed malachite, a mineral. Copper. In sufficiently hot furnace, malachite releases copper. The melting of is 1,000 degrees. Its furnace for ceramics produced from 800. I need a furnace. More. Deeper. With better pull. But first, a stone. Arn asked Vuk about green stones. Vuk thought for a long time. Then said that he had seen green stones on the bank of the Wad in the journey to south. The stream flowed from the hills. In the hills were caves. In caves the walls glistened. Arn was about to go to the next one. The Craig went with him. Mira said that they both are, and gave them a bag of Wad for 2 days. They walked all day. By evening they found a stream. Narrow, it cold water. The Wad is sandy, and on the shore among ordinary rocks they lay. Green, with veins. Arn lifted a stone and felt as my heart beat faster. Malachite. He clutched this stone and thought, that holds in his the following few thousands years technologies. A knife that doesn't break like flint. The tip of the dick that pierces the hide. A tool that can be and make anew. They gathered stones as they carry, 2 bags, heavy. The way took a day and a half after that I had to stop. When they returned, Arn immediately began to build a new furnace. This was not just in-ground. It was structure. Deep chamber. Thick walls made clay mixed with sand. Double walls. Between them is layer for insulation. Channel for draft from below. Opening at the top which can be closed for monitoring temperature. Arn drew a plan on ground and explained to Craig. Craig listened and shaking his head, but he was building. They built a stove for 2 weeks. The community was working. 10 people. Someone was the clay, someone carried sand, someone chopped wood. We a lot firewood. A lot. To reach 1,000 degrees, the wood must burn in enclosed space for several hours without a break. Arn knew that the ancients used wood charcoal. First you had make the charcoal. Burn the without access air. More one process. Another furnace, a small one, for coal. Craig built both of them. His hands were covered in burns, calluses, and clay. He didn't complain. 2 weeks later the furnace was ready. Arn loaded it with malachite. He covered it with coal. He lit the fire. And then he waited. The heat was so intense that you couldn't stand 2 steps away from the kiln. The air shimmered. The coals glowed white. Arn sat by the kiln and fed it coal every hour. Craig took over when Arn started to doze off. Myra brought water and grumbled that they'd both burn their lungs. 8 hours passed. Arn peered into the furnace through the top opening. The malachite had darkened. It had turned black. But it hadn't melted. The temperature wasn't high enough. Arn added more coal. He closed the top opening halfway. The draft grew stronger. The heat rose. He could feel it on his face. Another 4 hours. 12 hours since he started. Arn looked inside again and saw it. At the bottom of the furnace, a small puddle glimmered dimly, tiny, no bigger than a thumbnail, red, copper. Arn stared at that drop and couldn't move. In his past life, he'd seen copper artifacts in museum display cases. Neat, with labels and dates, behind glass. Now he stood before a hole in the ground and looked at a drop of metal he himself had pulled from the rock. The feeling was different, not academic, physical. He felt his eyes getting wet and quickly wiped his face. Smoke. Of course, smoke. Craig was standing nearby. He looked at the puddle of copper and said nothing. Then he asked what it was. Arn replied that it was the future. Craig said the future was very small. Arn smiled. He said he'd wait for it to cool down and then show him. When the copper had solidified, Arn took it out of the furnace. A shapeless lump. Heavy for its size, reddish with dark spots. Arn placed the lump on a flat stone and struck it with another stone. The copper flattened out. It didn't split like flint, it flattened out. Arn struck it again and again, shaping it. An hour later he held something resembling a blade in his hands. Rough, crooked, dull, but it was a blade made of metal. The first in this world. He sharpened it on a stone, tried it on a branch. The copper blade cut through the wood twice as fast as flint, and it didn't break. Craig took the blade in his hands and turned it over. He scraped his fingernail across the surface. He tried to bend it and couldn't. He looked at Arn and said that if they could make a spearhead out of this, it would change everything. Arn nodded. It really would change everything. But there was a problem. 12 hours of work, a mountain of coal, and in the end, just one small lump. It would take months to arm 10 men. And the Red Fangs wouldn't wait months. Word of the copper blade spread quickly. It wasn't clear how. Arn suspected Roll. Roll had left the camp for 2 days and returned with 3 people. 2 men and a woman. They came from the Green Hollow tribe. They said they'd heard about people who made weapons from stone that flowed like water. They wanted to see it. Arn showed them. One of the men reached out toward the blade and cut himself. He looked at the blood on his finger and couldn't understand how the stone could be so sharp and yet not break. All 3 stayed. By the end of the 3rd month, there were 22 of them. 22 mouths. 22 pairs of hands. The settlement had grown. 6 huts. The wall was extended. A second kiln for pottery. The first kiln for copper. The irrigation ditch had paid off. The barley had sprouted. Thin green stalks in the muddy field. The first harvest would be in 2 months, if nothing went wrong. Arn introduced a schedule. Work in the morning, lunch and rest in the afternoon. Work again in the afternoon. A communal bonfire in the evening. He didn't call it a schedule. He called it a daily routine. People got used to it slowly. For thousands of years, their ancestors had lived without a schedule. Wake up. Eat if there was food. Go look for food if there wasn't. Go to sleep when it got dark. The idea that time could be divided into parts and each part assigned a task was a revolution no less significant than copper. Mira took full charge of medicine. She brewed decoctions in ceramic pots. She dried herbs under a canopy. She knew the name of every plant within a day's walk. Arn told her about aloe and its healing properties. Mira said they didn't have aloe, but they had sap from coniferous trees that did the same thing. Arn told her about willow bark and salicylic acid. Mira said she knew the bark relieved fever and pain, and that her grandmother knew this, and her grandmother's grandmother too. Arn realized he had underestimated the knowledge passed down orally. Thousands of years of observation. No books, no records. From mouth to mouth. A fragile chain that broke every time the last bearer died. Mira was a link in that chain, and Arn decided that this chain needed to be made stronger. He began to think about writing. Not now, later, when there was time, when there was something to write on and something to write with. But the idea took root. One night, Arn woke up to a noise. Craig was standing by the wall, looking east. Arn walked over. On the horizon, a thin strip of orange light. Not dawn. Dawn was on the other side. It was a fire. Big. Far away. But big. Craig said it was 2 days' journey away, maybe 3. Arn asked what was there. Craig said there used to be a tribe of the tall pines. Used to be. They stood in silence and watched the distant fire. The red fangs were moving. They were closer than Arn thought. The fire on the horizon burned 2 nights, then went out. Arn didn't sleep both nights. He sat against wall and counted. 2 days of travel, maybe 3. Red fangs were moving toward west. Their journey led straight through the territory the wolves, and then through the territory Arna. If they went from that same speed as described, Craig at the settlement was from 3 to 5 months. It may less. Red fangs didn't go in a straight line. They stopped. They looted. They took people and supplies. Then they on. But the direction did change. West. Always west. Arn went from the wall at it the 3rd day, gathered everyone 22 people at the bonfire. He spoke briefly. He said that in east they're a tribe. Aggressive. What it is toward their direction. What is them have time but not much. Craig confirmed. He said about the foxes, about 50 warriors who went out from the forest, about stone axes and spears with bone tips, about red marks on cheekbones. Tor asked how there were. Arn said that according Vukavuk, not at 200. Silence, silence. 22 people looked at Arna. 22 versus 200. Lena pressed to her son. Dan put his hand on his roll spat and said that we leave to west. Arn shook his head. He said that run. But running means to abandon the walls and stoves and the barley and ditch and everything that they built. To run means, again, become vagrants, again. Once again, go hungry. To die from illness and the cold. He said that there another way. He said that 200 people with stone axes can be stopped if you have something you them don't. Walls, weapons made copper, tactics. Roll asked what tactics could help when you intend 10 smaller. Arn replied that in his knowledge there are many examples when small forces defeated the great. But for this, time and work, a lot work. He divided people into groups. The first group, construction workers, Craig and 4 men. Their task is to the wall. Lift it to 2 meters. Dig logs deeper. Prepare a behind the wall so it stand. Stand on it and throw stones or spears from above. The second group, hunters, 3 men. Walking to the toward south and wear malachite. Every 3 day a new batch of stone. The third group of Nova and Lena. Food, supplies, drying meat and fish, harvesting berries and roots. Barley as weight as ripe, and every day without hunger was a gift. The fourth group, Arn. 1. He smelted copper and made weapons. The work went every day. From dawn until dusk, Arn stood by the stove and was feeding it with Nuva and listened the gates as the air and the flue. He melted copper and forged it on a stone. Spearheads, 10 of them in the first week, rough, heavy, but sharp and sturdy. Craig fitted the first spearhead onto the shaft and hurled the spear at a tree. The copper tip sank 3 fingers deep into the trunk. The stone one went in 1 finger deep. Craig pulled the spear out and looked at the tip, intact, not a crack. Craig said that with a spear like that, he would have killed that bear, not the bear him. Arn made knives, axes, small ones. He saved metal. Every gram of copper counted. He taught Craig to forge. Showed him how to heat a lump in the coals and strike it while it was hot. Craig mastered it in 2 days. His strikes were more precise. His work was smoother. By the end of the month, they had 20 spears with copper tips, 8 knives, 3 axes, an arsenal that in a past life would have seemed pitiful. In this world, it was an unprecedented wealth. In the 6th week after they saw the fire, 4 people came to the wall. A woman with 3 children. The woman was wounded. A long wound on her back, healing but inflamed. She said they were from the High Pines tribe, the very same one. The Red Fangs had come at dawn. The woman didn't go into details. She simply said that out of 35 people, 6 had left. She didn't know where the other 5 were. Mira treated the wound. She fed the children. The youngest was about 2 years old. He didn't cry. Children who have seen too much don't cry. Arn looked at this child and felt a lump in his throat. He went over to the forge and worked late into the night. He forged arrowheads and thought that each one might save a life. 3 days after the refugees arrived, a man came. Alone. A big man, with a child in his arms, a boy of about 4. He was asleep. The man was strange, not like the other exiles, not thin, not frightened, wary, like a beast that had come to a stranger's watering hole. His name was Narg. He didn't speak right away. First he examined the wall, then the huts, then the stove. Then he looked at the copper spearheads, and his eyes changed. He asked where they came from. Arn said he had made them himself. Narg was silent for a long time. Then he said he was a deserter, from the Red Fangs. Arn didn't move. Craig reached for the spear. Arn stopped him with a gesture. Narg spoke slowly. He had been a warrior of the Red Fangs for 7 years. He said he left because the chief of the Red Fangs had ordered the killing of children in the captured tribes. Boys. The girls were taken away. The boys were killed. Narg said that when the order came for his own son, he took the child and left at night. They chased him for 2 days. He killed one of his pursuers. The second fell behind. Narg walked west for 3 weeks. He saw smoke from the hearths and came. Craig didn't trust him. Craig said so outright. He said Narg might be a scout. Arn nodded. It was possible. But Arn looked at the boy in Narg's arms. The child slept with his face pressed against his father's neck. He slept the way children sleep, who know that as long as their father is nearby, the world is safe. Scouts don't take children with them. Arn said that Narg could stay. But first, he would tell everything he knew about the Red Fangs. Narg spoke for 3 evenings in a row. Arn listened and drew with a stick on the ground. There weren't 200 Red Fangs, 240. Of those, about 100 were combat-ready warriors. The rest were women, children, and old people. The chief's name was Kair. Narg described him. Tall, thin, not the strongest, but the smartest. Kair didn't fight in the front lines. Kair stood behind and gave orders. He divided the warriors into groups. One group attacks from the front, another would flank from the side, a third would lie in ambush along the retreat route. Arn listened to this and felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what it was. Tactical thinking, coordination of units, flanking maneuvers, things they taught in military academies in his past life. Stone Age tribes don't fight like this. Stone Age tribes run in a mob, screaming and striking whoever is closest. Coordination emerged with the first states, thousands of years from today. But Kair already fought that way. Arn asked Narg how Kair knew these tactics. Narg shrugged. He said Kair had always been strange, ever since childhood. He said things a child couldn't possibly know. He predicted where the game would go. He knew which way the wind would turn. He knew which berries were poisonous without even tasting them. The people in the tribe thought he spoke with the spirits. Arn sat by the fire after his conversation with Narg and stared into the flames. His hands didn't move. The thought was simple and terrifying. Kair remembered his past life, just like Arn. But Kair wasn't a historian. Kair was someone who knew war, truly knew it, not from books, from experience. Arn closed his eyes. In his past life, He had studied the history of civilizations, rise and fall, trade and culture, technology and art. War was a chapter in a textbook, a paragraph on an exam. Kyer had apparently studied war not as a paragraph. Arn opened his eyes and looked at the sleeping camp. 26 people, children, an old man, the wounded, against 100 warriors commanded by a man with the memory of a professional soldier. Arn tossed a branch into the fire and thought that choking on a nut while defending his dissertation hadn't been the worst moment of his existence. That moment was happening right now. Arn did sleep until morning. He sat and thought. He, like a historian, in past life he knew hundreds battles Thermopylae, Cannae, Azincourt, small forces against the many, victories that seemed impossible. In all these battles, the winner was an advantage, terrain, weapons, or knowledge of what did the enemy. Arna had weapon which was the Red's fangs, copper, but Kyer commanded 100 warriors and knew tactics. Arn commanded a dozen untrained men and knew how to make pots. Straight battle was suicide, so a direct combat will. At dawn, Arn gathered Craig and Narga. He explained the plan. Not defense, ambush. The Red's fangs are an open field, so you can't meet them in open field. We need to make them go there where them's strength does work. A narrow bottleneck, forest, gorge. A place where 100 people can turn around in a line. Where is not allowed to on the flank. Where 20 men from copper spears equal 100 with stone ones. Narg listened and nodded. He said that Kyer was people through the gorge 3 times for the year. Each time Kyer sent scouts ahead. Every time Kyer went last. Kyer never did entered into the trap. Arn asked what if the trap looks not like a trap? Narg looked at him and said, but Arn saw that the thought had taken hold. Arn put the plan for the battle, until the Red's fangs remained 3 or 4 months, maybe more. Right now need have build, not walls, people. In 3rd month the changed. Arn called it New Hearth, not loudly, just said one by the campfire, that place where a fire for everyone, this hearth. And once they built anew, then let be New Hearth. Lena repeated that name, then Mira, then Craig. The word stuck. New Hearth grew. By the end of the 3rd month have another 9 people. 2 hunters from a disbanded tribe in the west. The family of 5 people who was too south and got lost. 2 teenagers who ran away from home because that they heard about a place where they shiny weapons. Arn looked. He looked at the teenagers and thought that young people are the same in every era. They always head where the action is. 35 people. The problems grew along with the population. There wasn't enough food. The barley wasn't ripe yet. The fish from the river could feed 20 people, but not 35. Hunting yielded a catch only occasionally. Arn solved the problem in 3 ways at once. First, traps. Not fishing traps, hunting traps. Arn remembered 3 types of traps from his course on primitive societies. A pit with stakes for large game, a rope snare for medium-sized game, a wicker cage for small game. Craig and Narg set 12 traps around the settlement. The first week, they caught 2 hares and a badger. The second week, a deer, a young one. There was enough meat to last everyone 3 days. The second method, drying and smoking. Mira suggested smoking the meat over a slow fire. Arn explained the principle. Smoke contains substances that kill bacteria and prevent decay. They built a smokehouse, a simple one, a pit with coals, a wicker grate above it, a hide on top to trap the smoke. The smoked meat kept for weeks. The third method, expanding the fields. Arn found wild onions and wild carrots, not like the ones in the future, thin, tough, but edible. He planted them next to the barley, a second irrigation channel from the river. Thor dug it for 3 days, almost alone, because the others were busy. Thor didn't complain. Thor never complained at all. He just worked. Every day. In silence. Arn thought that if he had 20 Thors, he would have built a civilization in a year. By the 4th month, the barley had ripened. Arn stood at the edge of the field and looked at the golden ears of grain. A small field. 30 steps by 20. A harvest that would last a week if stretched out. But it was a harvest. The first harvest in the history of this world, or at least the first one Arn knew of. They gathered the ears by hand, rubbed them between stones to separate the grain from the husks. Mira cooked porridge in a large pot, thick, tasteless. Arn looked at the faces around the fire. 35 people were eating porridge made from barley they had planted and grown themselves. None of them understood what was happening. They thought they were eating some strange grass. Arn knew they were eating a revolution. Agriculture. The end of the nomadic life, the beginning of everything. That evening, Arn began working on what he had been thinking about for a long time. Writing. Not an alphabet. An alphabet required concepts these people did not yet possess. Pictograms. Simple drawings. A person, a tree, water, fire, a beast, sun, moon. He scratched 20 symbols onto a flat piece of clay and fired it. He showed it to Mira. Mira looked at it for a long time. Then she poked her finger at the water symbol and said it looked like it. Then she poked at the fire symbol and said it didn't look like it. Arn redrew it. He showed it to Craig. Craig said they were drawings and asked why draw them when you could just say the words. Arn explained. Words die when a person dies. A drawing on clay lives longer. If you write down where the food is, how many people are in the camp, and which plants are medicinal, that knowledge won't be lost when Mira or Arn or Craig die. Craig thought about it all evening. Then he came over and asked to see the spear symbol. Arn showed him. Craig took a stick and scratched it into the ground, crooked, but recognizable. It was a moment Arn remembered. A Stone Age hunter had written the first symbol. Until that day, all the information in the world had been stored in people's heads. From that day on, it began to be stored outside of people's heads. Arn knew what that meant. It meant that knowledge would outlive any single person. It meant that civilization had taken one step closer to immortality. In the 5th month, Arn began training the people. Not in hunting, in combat. Narg took charge of physical training. He knew how the Red Fang warriors trained. Running, spear throwing, wrestling. Narg put 10 men through their paces every morning. They ran around the wall, threw spears at wooden targets, learned to stand shoulder to shoulder. Arn explained the tactics. He drew on the ground, a line of shields. Spears in the second line strike from behind the shield-bearers' backs. Don't scatter. Don't break formation. Hold the line. In a past life, this was called a phalanx, a Macedonian phalanx. Arn had seen reenactments on YouTube. Now he was forming a phalanx of 10 men with homemade shields and copper spears. The shields were made of wood, heavy, rough, tied together with ropes and covered in hide. Not shields, but more like wooden doors with handles. But they covered the body from the throat to the knees. Narg looked at the formation of 10 men behind the shields and said, "It might work. If the enemy doesn't flank us." Arn nodded. If the enemy doesn't flank us. And Kair always flanked. So they needed a place where flanking was impossible. Arn sat with Vuk and asked about the terrain to the east. Vuk described it. A forest, hills, a single ravine, deep, with sheer walls. A single path led through it, narrow. 2 people couldn't pass side by side. Arn asked for a more detailed description. Vuk spoke, and Arn sketched on clay. The ravine ran from north to south, long. The path crossed it from east to west. The descent was steep. The ascent was steep. A stream at the bottom. Arn smiled. For the first time in months. Narg saw that smile and asked what was so funny. Arn said there was nothing funny. He had simply found a place where 20 men could stop 100. Sixth month began with a surprise. Arn woke up to the sound. Craig was standing at the entrance at the U2 and said that by the wall, someone is a little one. Arn came out. At the wall stood by Dirty, barefoot, in tattered clothes, with a sack made leather over shoulder. Arn recognized her by her eyes. Irma, his sister, 7 years old. She went 2 days of alone through the forest. Arn dropped to his in front her. Irma looked at him from below up. She didn't crying. She said that left at night when everyone was asleep. What was along the river toward east because that I remembered that Arn went to the river. What? Berries. Berries, and drank water from streams. What did the wolf? But Wolf didn't come closer. Arn listened and felt as inside something rising and heavy. 7 years. 1, 2 days. Through where they're predators. He didn't know what to say. Mira walked and took Irma. She fed her. I washed her. I checked her over. A few scratches, and slote by Anne on the ankle. Nothing. Myra looked at Arna and shook her head. She said that the girl either very brave or very foolish. Arn replied that the difference is negligible. Irma settled in a day. By evening, she already knew the names of 30-50 people. To the next morning, she had the settlement and asked 100 questions. Why smoke from the pit? Why water flow through ground? What is on spears? Can we eat clay? Arn replied to every question. Irma listened and nodded. Not like a child who pretends he understands. Like a person who remembers. On third day, Irma saw clay plates with pictograms. She sat in front of them for an hour. Then she to Arnu and said that the symbol of the tree resembles to a fish. Arn looked. It was right. He redid it. Irma began paint. Not pictograms, maps. She drew the route from the stone wolves to New Hearth. River, forest, hills, rocks. She painted accurately, with proportions that struck Arna. A 7-year-old child drew a map of the Deserk from memory, and map was recognizable. Arn showed the card to Vuk. Vuk could see, but Arn described what is drawn. Vuk nodded and adjusted it. Here the hill higher. Here the stream turns. Here the clearing is wider. Irma listened and redrew it. By the end of the week, them had a freak wolf of within a radius 3 days' journey. Rough, on clay tablets, but a map, the first map in the world. Arn looked at his sister and thought that sometimes a genius doesn't need a past life. Sometimes a genius is born right where they were born. By the 6th month, the settlement had grown to 45 people. People came constantly, 2 or 3 at a time. Word of the New Hearth spread through the forests like smoke. A place with walls, where there was food every day, where they made shiny weapons, where a strange young chieftain with gray temples knew things no one else knew. Arn didn't call himself a chieftain, but the people called him that. He settled disputes. He assigned work. He told them what to do when no one else knew. He was a leader, whether he liked it or not. As the settlement grew, so did the problems. There wasn't enough food again. The second field of barley had been sown, but the harvest was 2 months away. Hunting and traps fed 30 people, not 45. Arn thought it over and decided they needed to diversify their diet. He remembered bread, barley flour, water, a flatbread on a hot stone, simple. He ground the grain between 2 stones, a flat stone on the bottom, a round one on top. The flour turned out coarse, with bits of husk. He mixed the flour with water, made a flatbread, placed it on a hot stone by the fire. The smell rose a minute later, a smell that took Arn's breath away, the smell of bread. Not like in the bakery from his past life, coarser, more bitter, but recognizable. The flatbread was hard and tasteless by the standards of his past life. But here and now, 45 people were staring at this flat, gray circle as if it were glowing. Lena tried it first. She chewed for a long time. Then she said it was better than porridge. Mira tried it and said it was nothing special, but she took a second flatbread. Bread became the staple of their diet. There was enough barley because one handful of grain yielded 2 flatbreads. 2 flatbreads fed 1 person a day. With fish or meat, it was a complete meal. Arn set the rations. 2 flatbreads a day for every adult. Children got 1, plus porridge. Hunters and those who worked hard got 3. Roll said that was unfair. He asked why Craig got 3 flatbreads and he got 2. Arn explained that Craig built the wall for 10 hours a day, while Roll carried water for 3 hours. Roll grumbled but accepted it. Grumbling was Roll's normal state. If Roll was silent, it meant something was seriously wrong. Halfway through the 6th month, Arn began building a smithy. Not just a furnace for smelting, a real smithy. A stone platform, a shelter from the rain, a place for coal, a place for an anvil. A large flat stone served as the anvil, heavy, smooth. Arn and Craig dragged it from the river for 3 days. Mira said they'd both strain themselves to death and she'd have to bury 2 idiots. They didn't strain themselves. The forge was in operation every day. Craig forged. Arn smelted the ore. Narg helped with the bellows. The bellows were primitive. 2 leather bags with wooden tubes. Narg squeezed the bags and air flowed into the furnace, raising the temperature. With the bellows, the copper melted faster. Not 12 hours, but 8. Then 6. Production doubled. Arn began to think about bronze. Copper is soft. The blade gets dull. The tip bends under a strong blow. Bronze is copper mixed with tin, harder, stronger, holds its edge. But for bronze you need tin, and Arn hadn't seen any tin anywhere nearby. He asked Vuk. Vuk thought about it for 3 days. Then he said that to the north, beyond the mountains, there was a place where dark stones jutted out of the ground, staining one's hands gray. Arn wasn't sure if it was tin. It could have been anything, lead, graphite, but it was worth checking. An expedition north meant a week's journey, there and back. Arn couldn't be gone for a week. Not now. Not with the red fangs approaching. He sent 2 hunters, young ones, fast ones. He gave them a description of what to look for. Dark, heavy stones that stain your fingers. They left at dawn. While they were gone, Arn worked on the wall. The wall had risen to 2 meters along its entire length. Craig had come up with the idea of making pointed stakes on the outside. Angled outward, impossible to pass without getting hurt. Arn looked at the stakes and remembered medieval pike fences, those very same pointed stakes that were placed in front of infantry formations against cavalry. There was no cavalry here, but the principle was the same. Slow down, wound, stop. The hunters returned 10 days later. They brought stones, dark ones, heavy ones, with a distinctive sheen. Arn took a stone in his hands and felt its weight. Tin, or something very similar. He threw a piece into the furnace. The stone melted at a lower temperature than copper. That was a good sign. Arn mixed the molten metal with copper. 9 parts copper, 1 part tin. The classic ratio he remembered from his archaeology lectures. The mixture solidified. Arn struck it with a stone. The sound was different. Ringier, clearer. Copper sounded dull. This sounded like a bell. Bronze. Arn fashioned a knife blade from it. He sharpened it. He tested it on wood. The knife cut so sharply that shavings flew. He tried to bend it. It wouldn't bend. He struck the blade against a stone. No nicks. Craig took the knife and ran his thumb along the blade. Blood appeared instantly. Craig looked at his finger and then at Arn. He said that with a weapon like this, you could fight. Arn nodded. With a weapon like this, you could. To end the first year, Nutha had 80 people. Arn stood against the wall and looked at the settlement that a year ago was a cave with a pot. Now, inside the walls, stood 12 houses. Not shacks, houses, with mud brick walls and roofs made poles covered straw and smeared with clay. Craig came up with the design. Arn came up with the idea. The frame made logs. Walls made woven twigs coated with straw. The clay dries and becomes hard as stone. Arn remembered that this technique was called mazanka. In the life, he saw such houses in ethnographic museum under the air. I thought that primitive. Now he lived in such at home and considered it a palace because that in it didn't drip and it draft. The was every day. 3 people worked in shifts. Craig trained 2 people. Bronze weapons was accumulating. 30 spears with bronze pommels. 15 knives. 8 axes. 20 shields made wood and hides. Arn introduced standards, each tip of one size, each spear of length, each shield of the shape. In past life it was standardization, one of things that distinguished the army from crowd with weapons. Narg trained the fighters, 30 men and 6 women who had volunteered. Narg made no distinctions. He said that a spear doesn't ask who holds it. Every morning, formation. 10 people in a line, shield to shield, spears above the shields. Step forward on command. Stop on command. Step back on command. Simple things. But people who had never stood in formation learned slowly. Thor confused left and right. Roll forgot to raise his shield. One of the newbies dropped his spear on his neighbor's foot. Narg cursed so loudly that birds flew up from the trees. But after a month, the formation held. Not perfectly, but it held. Arn watched the training and thought that Leonid and his Spartans would have laughed. But it was easier for Leonid. The Spartans had trained since childhood. These people had been training since last Tuesday. Writing was developing. Irma turned out to be more than just talented. She was obsessed. She drew symbols on every spare piece of clay. She invented new ones. A symbol for rain, a symbol for illness, a symbol for danger. She drew symbols for numbers, 1, 2, 3, sticks, simple and clear. Arn showed her how to record the number of people in the settlement. 8 sticks of 10. Irma frowned and asked why 10 and not 5. Arn explained that humans have 10 fingers, so counting in tens is convenient. Irma looked at her fingers. Then she nodded. Mira became the first person to use writing for a practical purpose. She asked Irma to record which plants helped with what. Irma drew. A leaf with 3 lobes is plantain. A flower with 4 petals is a daisy. Next to it, a symbol for the illness they treat. Stomach, head, wound. The first medical handbook was complete. On clay, with pictures. So primitive that in a past life, Arn would have put it on a shelf as a souvenir. In this life, it could save dozens of lives, because now Mira's knowledge wouldn't die with her. Arn thought about school. Not now, later. If there is a later. But the thought of teaching children to read and write never left him. 10 children in the settlement, 10 future adults who might know more than their parents, who might teach their own children, a chain, an endless chain of knowledge. That is what civilization is, not walls or weapons, a chain of knowledge that never breaks. By the end of the first year, Arn looked older than his 20 years. His graying temples had widened, dark circles under his eyes, his hands scarred from burns and cuts. Mira scolded him every evening. She said he slept too little, ate too little, and worked too much. Arn replied that there was no time. Mira said a dead chieftain was worse than a tired one. Arn knew she was right, but he couldn't stop. Because every day brought the Red Fangs closer. The scouts Arn sent east every week brought news. The Red Fangs had stopped. They had taken over the territory of the former High Pines tribe. They had set up camp. They were hunting. But they weren't moving any further. For now. Narg said that was normal. The Red Fangs always stopped for the winter. They don't fight in winter. In winter, they gather their strength. In spring, they move on. Arn did the math. Winter would last another 3 months. Then spring. Then the Red Fangs would move on. It was 2 or 3 days' journey to the new hearth. 5 months. Maybe 6. Arn made use of every day. He improved the wall. Now it was double. The outer wall was made of sharpened stakes, the inner one of logs. Between them was a moat, shallow, knee-deep, but filled with water from the irrigation canal. Anyone who climbed over the outer wall would find themselves knee-deep in water, with a second wall in front of them. Delay. Every second of delay was a second for the defenders to strike with their spears. Arn built 3 observation posts. Tall, made of logs tied together. From them, one can see a day's march ahead. A lookout was on duty at each platform, day and night, shifts every 6 hours. Arn introduced a signal system. Smoke. 1 column of smoke means all is quiet. 2 columns mean caution. 3 plumes meant danger. Everyone gathered inside the walls. Craig asked why all this preparation if Arn planned to meet the Red Fangs in the ravine and not at the walls. Arn replied that the plan might not work, that you always need a backup plan, that no battle in history had ever gone exactly according to plan. Craig asked in which history. Arn said in any. One night, Arn sat alone by the fire. Everyone was asleep. He stared at the embers and thought of Kyre, of the man on the other side of this world who also remembered another life. A soldier. Narg had described him, thin, calm, eyes that always looked as if they saw something others couldn't see. Arn knew that feeling. He looked that way himself. The difference was that Arn looked and saw how to build. Kyre looked and saw how to destroy. 2 people from the future. In a world that doesn't yet know what the future is. Arn thought that, in a bad novel, they would have met and talked. 2 reborn. 2 memories. A conversation about the fate of the world by the campfire. In reality, their meeting would be different. Kyre is leading 100 warriors west. Arn stands with 36 fighters in a narrow ravine. One of them will not leave. Arn threw a branch into the fire and went to sleep. There's a lot of work tomorrow. The second year began with rain, 3 weeks without a break. The river has its banks. The water rose to the first wall and flooded the ditch. The mud was everywhere, in houses, in fields, on people. Barley in lower field has perished. The upper field survived only because that Craig, for 2 days before the flood, raised an earthen embankment around it. Arn did asked him. Craig looked at sky and decided on my own. Arn thought that Craig was starting to think about a step ahead. This was more any instrument. When the water left the settlement, calculated the losses. 3 houses were washed away. Barley in one of warehouses got and began rot. 12 pots broke when the deed to the shed. 2 months of work wasted in 3 weeks. Arn stood in the middle of the mud and looked at the wet ruins and thought that nature wasn't read his plan. Mira walked and said that 4 had fallen ill, cough and fever. Arn nodded. Cold water, dampness, an ordinary story. In past life it was with antibiotics for 3 days. In this life, it killed. Mira brewed decoctions without stop. Willow for heat, honey from bees from coughs. Honey found Irma. She discovered a hollow in an old tree in 2 hours' walk from the camp. The bees stung. Irma returned with a swollen face and a jar of honey. Mira said that she crazy. Then she took honey and began treat it. All 4 survived. Arn was rebuilding the settlement and at the same time built a new one. He decided that the next houses would on high ground, above the river on 5 meters. No flood will reach it. Craig asked why drag logs up the hill if possible to build by water. Arn explained. One time the river rose and flooded 3 houses. This happened again and again, every year. Build by water is convenient. Building on a hill is safe. Craig grumbled for days, then started drag logs up the hill. New hearth was moving. Not all at once, gradually. New houses were being built upstairs. The old were being torn down, and the material was reused. By the end, the second month on the hill stood 8 houses, the best than before. Arn improved the design. The foundation made stones. The walls are thicker. Roof has slope to rain runs off. Door opening with the threshold to dirt doesn't get inside. Every improvement seemed trivial. But taken, they made a difference between home and a refuge. A home is a place where you live. A refuge is a place where you not die. People kept to come. By the middle of the second year of their 120, Arn could remember everyone by name. He asked Irma to keep track of things. Irma started a clay tablet, the name of every new person, a symbol of where they came from, a symbol of what they could do. The first census. Arn smiled when he saw it. In his past life, the census was conducted once every 10 years, by an army of bureaucrats, with computers. Here, a 9-year-old girl kept it with a stick on clay. The result was the same. You know how many people you have and what they can do. As the population grew, Arn established a structure, not a government, simpler. People in charge. Craig was in charge of construction. Mira was in charge of health. Narg was in charge of defense and training. Lena was in charge of pottery and stockpiling. Tor was in charge of the fields and irrigation. Roll was in charge of ore mining. Everyone was responsible for their own area. Everyone reported to Arn in the evening by the fire. Arn didn't call it a council, but every evening 6 people gathered and discussed what had been done and what needed to be done. Craig said once that it was like a chief gathering the elders. Arn replied that there were no elders here. There were people who knew their business. Craig snorted and said it was the same thing, just phrased more elegantly. In the 4th month of the second year, news came from the east. A scout ran up, gasping for breath. The Red Fangs had broken camp from their winter encampment. They were moving west. Fast. Not like before. Before, they moved slowly and plundered along the way. Now, they were moving with purpose, as if they knew where they were going. Narg turned pale when he heard. He said that Kyr knew about the new hearth, the smoke from the forge, the rumors spreading through the forests. People who came to the settlement meant people were talking about it. Kyr was listening, and now he was coming. Arn asked how long. The scout said he'd seen the vanguard a day's journey from the ravine. The main group was a half-day behind. 2 days, maybe 3. Arn had 3 days. He called a council one last time. He spoke quickly. The plan was simple. Do not meet the Red Fangs at the walls. Meet them in the ravine. The ravine was a bottleneck, narrow, with sheer walls. A single trail crossed it from east to west. 3 people could walk on the trail at once. No more. 100 warriors were useless in a place where only 3 could fight. Arn will select 36 of the best fighters. He'll divide them into 3 groups of 12. The first group will take up position at the western edge of the ravine, in formation, shield to shield, spears forward, a wall of bronze and wood. The Red Fangs will climb the slope and run into the formation. Climbing a steep slope with weapons in hand and trying to break through a wall of shields is suicide, even for 100 men. The second group will take up position at the right edge of the ravine, with stones and spears. When the Red Fangs gather at the bottom of the ravine trying to break through the formation, the second group will strike from above. Rocks, spears, down, on the gathered people. The third group will go around the ravine and approach from the east, cut off their retreat. A pincer movement. The Red Fangs will be trapped in the ravine, shields in front, rocks from above, another formation behind them. Narg listened and nodded. He said the plan was good, But Kyre would send out scouts. Kyre always sends out scouts. Arn nodded. He said that was exactly why the third group would set out a day earlier. They would bypass the ravine in a wide arc. They would hide in the forest on the eastern side. Kyre's scouts will see the ravine. They'll see that there's a formation on the western side. They'll assume that's the entire force of the new hearth. They'll report to Kyre. Kyre will decide that 12 men against his 100 aren't a threat. Kyre will attack. And when his men gather in the ravine, the trap will snap shut. Narg paused. Then he said that Kyre wasn't a fool, that Kyre might not go into the ravine. He might go around it. Arn took out Irma's map. He showed it. The ravine stretched for 5 days' journey from north to south. Going around it would take at least a week. Kyre could have gone around. But Kyre was moving with a specific goal in mind. Quickly. Kyre didn't want to waste a week. Kyre had seen 12 people and wanted to get through them. It made sense. Arn was counting on logic. Narg asked what if Kyre wasn't logical. Arn said that then they would retreat behind the walls and defend the settlement. But that was Plan B. Plan A was the ravine. Craig raised his hand. He said he wanted to be in the first group, in the front line. Arn nodded. Mira stood up. She said she would go with them. Arn said no. Mira was needed in the settlement. If any of the fighters returned wounded, Mira had to be here. Mira looked at him so that the air grew colder. Then she nodded. Arn looked at Irma. Irma was sitting in the corner, drawing. She looked up and held out a tablet to him. It showed a map of the ravine, with elevations, with markers for the 3 groups' positions, with lines for bypass routes. A 9-year-old girl had drawn a tactical battle map. Arn took the tablet and looked at his sister. Irma said she had calculated that if the second group moved 100 paces south, the angle of fire would be better. Arn looked at the map. She was right. He shifted the second group's position. At dawn, 36 men marched out of the gates of Newhearth, with bronze spears and wooden shields. 84 people remained behind the walls. Children, the elderly, those who could not fight. Mira stood at the gate and watched them go. Irma stood beside her. She didn't wave. She was counting them. 36. She wanted to know the exact number so she could later count how many would return. The ravine looked exactly just as Vuk deep, with steep walls made gray stone, on bottom streams. The path led from the side a gentle slope and climbed toward the side steeply. Arn stood on edge and counted steps. The bottom of the ravine was 15 steps. The slope to west at an angle that will any running up to slow down twice as much. The path is narrow, 3 people side by side, not more. Perfect. Arn distributed the groups. The first group 12 people, Craig at the lead. They stood to the western edge of the ravine, 3 rows by 4. The first row to knee, shields on the ground, spears across the edge the shields. The second row standing, spears over the heads of the row. Third row with spare spears and stones. The wall, not Macedonian phalanx, rather a parody of it, but in a narrow space where the enemy rises up steep slope, even parody worked. The second group, 12 people. Position on southern edge of the ravine. Irma turned out right about the 100 steps, hence bottom of the ravine was visible across the length. Rocks, spears, throwdown, on their heads. People in the ravine will dodge. The wall's too close. The third group, 12 people. Narg at the lead. They left the day before. They the ravine from the north. Now we're hiding in the woods on the side. Arn didn't see them. He didn't have see. If he did seen then, and Scouts Kyra won't see. Arn stood with the group, not behind, not on the side, in first front. Craig said that that's silly, that the chief should stand behind and give orders. Arn replied that he was a chief. He is who choked a nut. Craig didn't understand. Arn said that he would get up be first row and period. They waited. Half a day. The sun rose. The air had warmed up. Sweat flowed down their ben and down arms and handle spears slippery. Arn wrapped his handle with a strip of leather. The rest made the same. Small change. A trifle that could save a life. Closer toward noon, Thor on his position waved his hand. The movement toward east. Arn squinted. From the forest to the side came Nifix, carefully, looking around. Scouts. They approached the edge of the bin and looked down, then looked toward west. We saw challenges to western edge, 12 people, shields, spears. One of the scouts pointed at formation, and something said to the others. They turned and went back into the forest. Arn exhaled. They saw 12. Only 12. The second group was lying at the edge of the ravine behind the rocks and was invisible from above. The third group was in the forest, far from the path. The scouts will report to Kairu that in the west, a handful people blocked the path. Kair will count. 100 against 12. Logic tells him that this is obstacle. An hour, then another. Arn stood and felt as his knees began shaking, not out of fear, from tension. To stand in formation and wait is worse than running. Running burns fear. Waiting builds it. Roll stood beside him. Roll, who grumbled every day and worked after sleeves. Roll, whose hands were on the shaft spear. Arn said to that, "Everything will be fine." Roll replied that he hated it when people said that, because usually after that, everything went wrong. Arn couldn't think of a comeback. Then he heard it. A sound. A dull, rhythmic thud. The pounding of many feet. And voices. Not screams. A rumbling. As if a great beast were breathing in the forest. The red fangs emerged from the trees on the eastern side of the ravine. Arn saw them for the first time. Red markings on their cheekbones. Stone spears. Stone axes. Skins fastened with leather straps. There were many of them. Arn tried to count them and lost track. 80. Maybe 90. They emerged from the forest and stopped at the edge of the ravine. They looked down. They looked at the formation on the western side. Arn saw their faces. No surprise. No fear. Curiosity. Some pointed at the bronze spearheads. The gleam of metal was new to them. Then a man stepped out of the group, tall, thin, unarmed. He stood at the edge of the ravine and looked at Arn, across 100 paces of emptiness. Kair. Arn knew it without words, by the way the others parted, by the way he stood, calm, relaxed, with his hands at his sides, like a man who had come to work. Kair looked at the formation, and Arn felt his gaze. Not like the gaze of a savage chieftain, like the gaze of a professional assessing an opponent. Kair saw the shields, saw the spears, saw the formation. And Arn saw the moment when Kair understood. A barely perceptible movement of the head, a turn. Kair recognized the formation. He knew what it was. He had seen it before, in another life. Two men from the future stood on opposite sides of the ravine and knew everything and nothing about each other. Kair turned to his men and spoke, briefly. Arn didn't hear the words, but he saw the reaction. The red fangs began to descend into the ravine. Not all of them. The vanguard, 30 men, quickly, running. They rolled down the eastern slope, leaped across the stream, and began to climb the western slope, toward the formation. Arn gripped his spear. His hands didn't tremble. He was surprised by this. In his past life, his hands had trembled during a philosophy exam. Now, 30 men with stone spears were running toward him, and he was calm. Maybe because he had already died once. A walnut. The best preparation for death is to have already been dead. The first red fangs reached the western slope. They were climbing. It was hard. The slope was steep. Their feet slipped. They dug their spears into the ground and pulled themselves up. And then Arn raised his hand. The second group at the edge of the ravine stood up. 12 men. Stones flew down. The first stone struck a climbing warrior in the shoulder, and he tumbled down, knocking 2 others over. The second stone struck a head. The third, a back. Spears followed. The bronze tips pierced the hides, which were not designed to protect against blows from above. The ravine had turned into a trap. Those climbing the slope couldn't dodge. Those standing below were caught in a hail of stones. Screams, chaos. The red fangs at the bottom of the ravine began rolling back, toward the eastern slope, and at that moment, a third group emerged from the forest on the eastern side. Narg in the lead, 12 men in formation, shields and spears. They blocked the eastern edge of the ravine. The path was cut off. The red fangs found themselves in a stone bag, a formation in front, rocks from above, another formation behind. Arn saw panic on their faces. People who were used to attacking and winning by numbers found themselves for the first time in a situation where numbers didn't matter. In the narrow ravine, their crowding worked against them. They were pushing each other, getting in each other's way, falling into the stream and climbing out wet and disoriented. Arn watched Kyre. Kyre stood on the eastern edge of the ravine behind his men. He hadn't gone down into it. He watched what was happening, and Arn could see his face. No panic. Calculation. Kyre turned quickly and shouted. Some of his men, about 30 who hadn't yet gone down into the ravine, turned and ran north. A flanking maneuver. Kyre split his forces. Those in the ravine held Arn in check. Those outside were moving around to strike from the flank. Arn knew this would happen. He didn't know when. The flanking maneuver through the woods would take an hour, maybe an hour and a half. He needed to end the battle before then. Arn gave the order. The first group moved down the slope, not up from the ravine but down into it. The formation moved slowly, step by step, shield to shield, spears forward. The red fangs in the ravine were now pinned at the bottom on both sides, between 2 lines of spears. The battle lasted less than an hour. The red fangs in the ravine collapsed. Not everyone fought. Some threw down their weapons. Some tried to scramble up the sheer walls. Some sat on the ground and covered their heads with their hands. Arn shouted to halt. The formation stopped. Arn stepped forward, alone, without a shield, with his spear point down. He said loudly that the battle was over, that those who dropped their weapons would live, that he didn't kill the unarmed. Silence. Then, one by one, spears and axes fell into the stream. 23 men surrendered. The rest lay on the ground, wounded or dead. Arn didn't count. Later. Now he had to think about the 30 who had gone around with Kyre. Narg approached. He said that Kyre wouldn't return. Not today. Kyre had lost half his men. He would retreat, regroup, think. Arn asked, "And then?" Narg paused. Then he said that Kyre would return. Definitely. Casualties of the hearth were 4 wounded and 1 killed. Roll. That very Roll who grumbled every morning and worked after sleeve and received 2 flatbreads instead of 3. Roll stood in the second row of the first group. As the formation descended into the ravine, his foot slipped on a wet rock. He fell out of formation. For a second. 1 second. A stone spear struck him in the side, between his shield and his neighbor's body. Roll fell. Craig shielded him and dragged him away. There was peace in the settlement. The nearest person with medical knowledge stood in formation with a spear. When the battle ended, Arn approached Roll. Roll was lying on the bank of the stream. His eyes were open. He was looking at the sky. He was breathing, slowly. Blood flowed from the wound and mixed with the stream water. Arn knelt down beside him. He pressed his palm against the wound. Hot, deep. Roll looked at him and said, "I told you, after you say everything will be fine, things usually don't go that way." Arn didn't answer. Roll died before sunset. Arn stood over the body and thought that in a past life he had read about battle casualties. Numbers, percentages, 1 in 36, 2.7%. A good ratio for an ambush, an excellent ratio. A number on a page in a textbook. And on the ground before him lay a man who grumbled and carried water and once tried to take a bite out of a bar of soap. Arn buried him on a hill above the river, the first grave of the new hearth. Irma carved a symbol into the stone, a spear and a shield, the symbol of a warrior. Roll was a poor worker. Roll was an average fighter. Roll died defending the place that had become his home. Arn could not have wished for a more worthy end for himself. The 23 Red Fang prisoners had become a problem. Arn could not let them go. They would return to Cair. He could not kill them. He didn't want to. He couldn't. Keeping them captive meant feeding 23 extra mouths and assigning men to guard them. Arn chose a fourth way. He spoke with each one by one, through Narga, who knew the language and customs of the Red Fang. Most of the prisoners were young, 20 years old, 25. Not all of them were warriors by calling. Many had joined the Red Fangs because the alternative was death. Cair left them no choice: join or die. Arn offered a third option: stay, work, live, eat every day, sleep under a roof. No one will force you to kill children. Of the 23, 16 agreed, 7 refused. Arn gave the refusers 3 days' worth of food and let them go. South. Not east where Cair was. South. Narg said Arn was making a mistake, that they would find Cair and tell him about the settlement, about the walls, about the bronze, about the tactics. Arn said that Cair already knew all of that. He had seen the formation, he had seen the ambush, he had seen the bronze spears. 7 people wouldn't tell him anything new. Narg shook his head but didn't argue. 16 former Red Fangs entered the new hearth. The first few days were hard. The people of the new hearth looked at them with hatred. A woman from the Tall Pines tribe, the one who had come with 3 children and a wound on her back, saw one of the captives and screamed. She recognized him. He was among those who had attacked her tribe. Arn stood between them. He said he understood, that the hatred was justified, but that murder wouldn't change the past, and that work could change the future. The woman cried. The captive stood with his head bowed. Arn didn't know if his words had helped, but the woman left, and the captive lived. A month passed, then 2. The former Red Fangs worked. Not all of them were the same. 2 turned out to be good hunters. 1 was a master stonemason, and his work with flint was astonishingly precise. 3 began helping Craig on the construction site. The rest did what they could. Slowly, hesitantly, but they did it. The settlement grew. By the middle of the second year, there were 150 people. Arn expanded the walls, a new plot on the hill, a third field of barley, a second field for the wild peas Irma had found 2 days' walk to the west. The peas provided protein, the barley provided energy, fish provided fat. Meat became a supplement rather than a staple. For the first time in the history of this world, a group of people was not entirely dependent on hunting. Arn thought about the next step. Bronze was going well, but tin was running out. Expeditions north for tin took 2 weeks and yielded little. A permanent route was needed. Trade. Arn sent a group of 5 men north, not for tin, to the tribes living near the mountains, with gifts. A bronze knife, 3 pots, a sack of barley grain. Envoys. The first trade mission. The group returned after 12 days. They had found a tribe, 30 people. They lived in caves at the foot of the mountains. Tin was everywhere around them. They didn't know what to do with it. They used green stones as ornaments. The envoys showed them the bronze knife. The chief of the mountain tribe took the knife and wouldn't let go for 3 hours. Then he asked how much tin was needed for such a knife. Arn smiled when they told him. Trade, exchange, specialization between groups, intertribal economy. It all began exactly like this, thousands of years ago, or thousands of years from now, or right now. The trade route was up and running. Once a month, a group would head north with bronze items and pots. They returned with tin and mountain goat skins, which were warmer than any others. Arn watched the caravan heading north and thought of the Silk Road, of the Phoenician merchants, of the caravans crossing the Sahara. It all began with a path between two groups of people who had what the others needed. The second year was drawing to a close when Cair struck. Not where Arn had expected. Cair didn't head for the ravine. Cair didn't head for the walls. Cair attacked a trade caravan. 5 men were heading north with their cargo. 4 returned. 1 did not. He was found later, on the trail, with a stone spear in his back. They took the cargo. Bronze knives, pots, grain, everything. Narg said it was reconnaissance by combat. Cair doesn't attack recklessly. He probes. He looks for weak spots. A trade route is an artery. Cut the artery and the body weakens. Arn felt anger. Not hot, cold. The anger of a man who understands that his opponent thinks just as he does. Cair was no savage with a stone spear. Cair was a strategist testing the limits. Arn reinforced the caravans. Now 4 fighters accompanied every trade party, with bronze weapons and shields. The caravans became slower but safer. Cair tried again. 10 warriors attacked the reinforced caravan. The New Hearth fighters held their ground, 2 wounded on each side. The Red Fangs retreated, but Arn knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Cair wasn't trying to destroy New Hearth with a head-on attack. Cair was trying to strangle it, isolate it, cut it off from resources. A siege tactic, something that didn't exist in the Stone Age. But Cair remembered other wars, other sieges. Arn responded in kind. He sent messengers to the mountain tribe. He proposed an alliance. Not just trade, protection. If the Red Fangs attacked the mountain tribe, New Hearth would send fighters. If they attacked New Hearth, the mountain tribe would send warriors. The chief of the mountain tribe thought about it for 3 days. Then he agreed. His tribe was small, 30 people. They had no chance against the Red Fangs. With New Hearth, a chance emerged. The first military alliance. The first treaty between 2 groups of people, based not on kinship, but on a common interest. Arn wrote the terms on a clay tablet. Irma drew the symbols of both tribes. Crossed spears for New Hearth, a mountain for the mountain tribe. They broke the tablet in half. 1 half remained with Arn, the other with the chieftain of the mountain tribe. Each half was meaningless on its own. Together, they formed a whole, a symbol of the alliance. Arn looked at his half of the tablet and thought that he was holding the first international treaty in the history of the world. On a shard of clay, scratched with a stick, signed by people who couldn't write their own names. But it was a treaty, and it worked. Cair didn't touch the mountain tribe, yet. He tried other ways. Twice in 3 months, small groups of Red Fangs approached the walls of New Hearth at night. They didn't attack. They watched. They counted. They left before dawn. Narg said that Cair was mapping out the defenses, looking for a weak spot in the wall, calculating how many fighters were in each section. Arn reinforced the night watch. Torches all along the wall, 4 posts, shifts every 4 hours. The 3rd year began quietly. The Red Fangs retreated eastward. They didn't leave, they retreated. Narg said that Cair is waiting, gathering strength. New people are coming to him, not just from the defeated tribes, from those who are afraid and see strength in Cair. Fear feeds an army better than barley. Arn used the silence. He expanded the settlement. New houses, new workshops. A pottery workshop. A weaving workshop. Mira taught 3 women to spin fiber. Coarse cloth. Not pretty, but warm. Better than skins. Irma ran a school. Not every day. 3 times in the 7-day cycle that Arn had established as a week. 12 children sat on the ground before her and learned the symbols. Irma was 10 years old. She taught children older than her to draw and count. No one argued. Irma knew more. Age didn't matter. Arn built a granary, a big one, out of stone and clay, with a raised floor so moisture wouldn't seep in from below. A 3-month supply of barley for 150 people. It was an emergency fund. Arn explained the idea. If the harvest failed or a siege occurred, the supply would save them. People don't go hungry if they think 3 months ahead. Mira expanded the apothecary. 6 wooden shelves. On each shelf, pots of dried herbs, ointments, and decoctions. Each pot was marked with a symbol. Irma drew the labels. Plantain, chamomile, willow, sap, honey. Mira trained 2 assistants. If something happened to Mira, the knowledge wouldn't die. A chain. Arn thought about Kyre every day. 2 people from the future. One built, the other destroyed. It was a simplification, and Arn knew it. Kyre built too. He built an army. He built a system of subjugation. He built an efficient machine of conquest. The difference was not in the method. The difference was in the goal. Arn built a place where people live. Kyre built a force that takes from others in order to survive. One night, Arn thought that in a past life he would have written a dissertation about this. 2 approaches to the survival of civilization. Cooperation versus domination. Creation versus conquest. He would have received reviews and spoken at a conference and drunk coffee during the break between presentations. Here, instead of a conference, there was a ravine filled with corpses. And instead of coffee, barley porridge. By the middle of the 3rd year, Arn received news. A messenger from a mountain tribe had run here in a day. The Red Fangs are on the move. Not toward the mountains, westward. The main force, all of them. Narg listened and said one word. War. Arn gathered everyone at the campfire. 153 people. He stood on stone platform which Craig built a month ago for meetings and looked at faces. The children were hiding behind their mothers. The elderly sat in silence. The soldiers stood at their weapons. Arn spoke calmly. He said that the Red's Fangs are coming, that around about 50 warriors, that Kyre is leading them personally, that battle will not be in the ravine. Kyre will not go into that same trap twice. They will hear, at the walls of the hearth. Silence. Then Craig stood up and said that the walls were strong. He built them himself. They will hold up. Narg stood up and said that the fighters were ready. 48 men, armed arms, with bronze and shields. Peace rose and said that the wounded she would heal, or she will die trying. Arn nodded. Then he said that he was just sit behind the walls and wait. Kyre awaits for the defense. So Arn will him something he doesn't expects. An attack. Narg looked at him as at a madman. Arn outlined a plan. The Red's Fangs will go through open terrain toward the walls. They are that the defenders will stand on walls and wait. Instead, that Arn will split his forces. 20 men behind the walls. Under. They visible defense. They are whom Kyre is waiting for. 28 people will leave at night to the arrival Red Fangs. They will split up into 2 groups. They will hide in the forest in both sides of the leading to New Ochag. When the Red's Fangs pass by and will begin the assault the walls, 2 groups will strike the rear. Narg said that it risky, that if Kyre deploys a rear guard. Arn nodded. He said that Kyre will put it out. Definitely. That's why we need a 3rd element. Allies from the tribe. 15 warriors of whom the chief. They will come from the north. At the same time with the ambush groups, Kyre will attack the walls, Ambush, ambush will strike from the flanks. Mountain warriors will strike from rear. Triple strike. Narg considered in his head. 20 on the walls. 28 in ambush. 15 mountain warriors. 63 against 150. Narg said that it all is 2-to-1, not in their benefit. Arn replied that the walls compensate the difference. What bronze compensates the difference? That suddenness compensates the difference. And that else. He spent Narga and Craig to the smithy. I showed them. 20 clay pots sealed with lids. Inside each pot is a mixture: sap, fat, dry grass. Arn named them fiery pots. The idea was simple. Light the wick, throw from the wall. The pot breaks. The mixture scatters. It burns. It go out from water. The sap burns even when wet ground. Narg took a pot in his hands. He turned it over in his hands. He asked it. Arn said that he had checked 3 times. It works. The radius of 3 steps. The 4 minutes. Narg placed a pot in its place. He said that Arn is a man. Arn replied that he a historian. Historians know all ways by which people killed each for 10,000 years. The messengers have to the tribe. Arn waited. Through 2 days that a reply. 15 warriors will go out at dawn. They will ask at new the hearth in day. Arn exhaled. Everything was falling into place, or everything was toward disaster. The line was thin. That night before the battle, Arn sat on the wall and looked toward east. Somewhere there was Kyre, a man who in another life might have an officer, or a general, or a sergeant, someone who knew the war not from books, but in dirt and blood and screams. Arn knew war from books, from lectures, from documentaries, films, based on museum exhibits. The difference was enormous. Kyre knew how to kill. Arn knew how people killed. This wasn't one in that. Irma approached and sat beside him, silently. 10 years. She already knew a child. Children in Stone Age grew up early. She wore a bronze knife on her belt that she had asked Craig for herself. She knew how to draw maps and count to 1,000 and write words using symbols. She knew the names of 153 people and remembered where each one came from. She was the first chronicler of the new hearth.
Exclusive videos, story continuations, and bonus content are already available on Patreon before YouTube, so check the link in the description for early access to all new recaps and continuations.